Hi guys, it's Mrs. Mattingly here, and today I'm going to read you Addison Cooke and the Tomb of the Khan, chapter 34, and it starts on page 346. This chapter is called The Nadam Horse Race. Addison pushed open the estate's main gate, and the team escaped into the chaotic streets of downtown Ulaanbaatar. They fought their way upstream against a river of pedestrians. Addison was shocked by the crowds. Streets were barricaded from vehicle traffic, and cheering throngs waved Mongolian flags. Molly spotted a tidal wave of triads pouring from Madame Feng's compound. They pointed at Addison's group and shoved their way through the crowd. "Hurry!" cried Molly. She tried to squeeze her way through the press of bodies, but there was no way past the police barricades. She wrung her hands in frustration. Why are all these streets shut down? "The horse race!" Addison shouted over the noise of the crowd. "Nobody said this is a national holiday." He gestured for everyone to duck low as the triads scanned the teeming legions of people. The barricades marked the route of the horse race, and none of the Mongolians wanted to give up their front row spots. "We're not getting anywhere on foot. We need transportation." Addison did most of his best thinking out loud. "We know the Russians went north, and there are no roads in the wilderness. If we want to follow Sir Frederick's clue, we need horses." Molly feathered her way through the masses of Mongolians. It seemed less crowded as they approached the starting line of the race. All the action would happen at the finish line. Where are we supposed to find horses? Addison slowly smiled. Molly began shaking her head vehemently. You know Mrs. Mattingly can't talk. Vehemently. "No, Addison, absolutely not." But he was already on the move, heading straight for the race stables. Addison's team had no choice but to follow, keeping one step ahead of the triads. Molly eyed the security guard manning the stable entrance. She didn't need to read Mongolian to understand the "do not enter" signs. "Addison, we're not allowed in there." Addison did not break his stride. "Good. That means Madame Feng isn't allowed in there either." "At least tell me you have a plan this time." He reverently quoted Sun Tzu's, "Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt." "You have no idea what you're doing, do you?" "I'm improvising." Addison waved to the guard manning the entrance. The young man was reclining on a chair, his feet propped on a porch railing, his legs blocking the doorway. He wore a New York Yankees ball cap and was reading a horse racing magazine. Both were in English, so Addison felt he was on good footing. "Good morning. We're just popping in to the stables for a quick look around." "No, you're not," said the guard. "Look, I hate to name drop," said Addison, pointing to Eddie, "but this is the Prime Minister's son. We need to check on the Prime Minister's investment." The guard looked at them and turned the page of his magazine. First time. Addison could see that he finally had the man's attention. "I can't tell you which horse is going to win, but I can guarantee you which 4 horses are going to lose. There are people who would pay a lot of money for that information." The guard scratched his chin. "I work for the stable. I can't gamble on the race." "Of course not," said Addison, reeling in the hook, "but your friends can, and your friends can share the wealth. Let us in, and you'll be up to your ears in Togrogs." The guard returned to his magazine, but he slowly lowered his legs from the railing, allowing Addison's team to pass. They percolated past the porch and into the stable. In the nick of time, thought Addison, spying who searching the stable yard. Inside the stable, Addison's nose was greeted with a bouquet of cigar smoke, horse sweat, and dung. The smell was so intense he forgot about Raj's odor entirely. He led the team into the locker room where all the jockeys were strapping on their boots for the race. To his surprise, the Mongolian jockeys were all young, probably for their small size. One girl looked young enough to be in elementary school. The cigar smell was so strong someone might as well have lit a skunk on fire. Taking the temperature of the room, Addison sensed the jockeys were a disgruntled lot and not too pleased about the upcoming event. He sidled up to a boy who looked to be his own age. "Sounds like a tough race." "Yeah, 15 kilometers, said the boy in surprisingly good English. "And dangerous?" "Are you kidding? Every year kids get thrown and injured. Half the horses cross the finish line without riders." He turned to spit on the dirt floor. "Don't you wear helmets?" "Of course not." "They must not have many liability lawyers in Mongolia," Eddie put it. "Well," said Addison, favoring the jockey with a sympathetic eye, "I guess they give you a lot of money if you win." "No, nothing," said the jockey bitterly. "We're just kids." "Well, at least credit?" "No, the way they see it, the horse did all the work." Addison saw that several of the jockeys were listening now. They were getting worked up. He continued stirring the pot. "So you're risking your lives for what? Just to entertain some financial grown-ups?" Fanatical grown-ups. The jockeys considered this. The 13-year-old finished lacing his boots and cocked an eye at Addison. "What's your angle here?" "I have a proposition." "I'm listening." "Instead of getting paid 0 togrogs to risk your life, how about I pay you 50,000 togrogs to skip the race?" "No good. Someone will notice we're missing." "Not if we're riding your horses." The jockey sized up Addison's team, mulling the idea. He waved over 3 of his comrades. 50,000 togrogs each. Addison did the math in his head. 50,000 togrogs was about $25 per horse. In America, horses cost thousands of dollars. $25 was a 99% discount. Normally, Addison would negotiate, but this was the deal of a lifetime. Done. The jockeys stripped off their jerseys and boots, showed Addison's group the stalls, and helped them mount up. The 13-year-old grinned up at Addison. "If anyone asks us, we'll say you jumped us and stole the horses." "Fair enough." Addison handed over the last of his cash and saluted with 2 fingers. Trainers guided their horses out of the stable, across the yard, and up to the starting gates. The crowd greeted Addison with a delightful melody of cheers, boos, and what he was pretty sure were death threats. He looked down at his red jersey. Whichever district of Mongolia he was representing, it wasn't a popular one. He shifted his mount, trying to get comfortable. It was Mongol custom to ride bareback, so there was no saddle to cushion his ride except a thin horse blanket. Trainers locked each horse into its starting gate. Molly whispered from the stall next to Addison's. "What is the plan?" "The street barricades will give us a clear path right out of the city." "Everyone in Mongolia watches this race," she hissed, noting some TV cameras. "Don't you think we'll get noticed?" "We're hiding in plain sight." Addison had no sooner spoken than several triads in the front row of spectators began leaping, shouting, and pointing at him. They called for racing officials, but couldn't be heard over the din. "They've found us!" cried Eddie. "We're done!" When the starter pistol fired, Eddie clutched his heart, convinced a triad had shot him. Luckily, the horses knew their business and leapt out of the gates. Addison suddenly knew how a bullet feels when it's shot from a gun. One moment you're minding your own business, and the next you're hurtling through space at the speed of sound. Addison's hands clung to his horse by the withers, but his stomach was left 100 yards behind at the starting gate. He reminded himself that the horses were carefully chosen from around the country, and were quite possibly the 12 fastest in Mongolia. Addison had only a few days' experience on a horseback. He felt like he was taking driving lessons on a Ferrari. The horses galloped past the VIP stand. Addison saw the mayor of Ulaanbaatar and the prime minister of Mongolia pointing at him. "Hey, that's the French ambassador's son." "Bonjour," Addison waved as he charged past. Checking over his shoulder, he was alarmed to see the mayor shouting directions at the police lieutenant. He didn't like where this was going. He called to Eddie and Raj behind him. "Pick up the pace a bit." The more experienced riders were pulling ahead. Addison leaned low over his horse's neck, streamlining his body. Police officers on walkie-talkies stepped into the racecourse ahead and attempted to grab Addison's reins as he careened past. He swatted at them with his riding crop. Addison swiveled his neck to see a police car burning up the racecourse behind him, flanked by 2 police motorcycles. They caught up to Eddie's mare. One of the motorcycle riders stretched out a gloved hand to snag Eddie's reins. Eddie managed to swerve out of reach at the last minute. The crowd, who had a lot of Togrogs riding on this race, loudly booed the police, showering them with rotten fruit. A police motorcycle pulled up close, spooking Addison's horse with its roaring engine. The policeman drew his baton and jabbed between the horse's ankles, trying to trip the galloping animal. Addison decided things were getting out of hand. It was time to take these horses off-roading. "Follow me," he cried to his team, and steered his horse straight for the nearest barricade. He assumed his mare would leap the barricade, but instead she crashed right through it. The crowd screamed and dove for cover. After his experiences in the Hong Kong night market, Addison was quite used to the sight of crowds diving for cover. His horse, however, was not. The panicked mare flailed her hooves, and Addison struggled to control her as they galloped clear of the thick press of the crowd and into the wide streets of downtown Ulaanbaatar. Addison checked to see if his group was keeping up and heard the roar of hundreds of angry Mongolians. They were tearing up their race tickets and shaking fists at him for wrecking the most important horse race in the country. Addison had upset a few people in his day, but never an entire city. He found he quite liked the attention. Dozens of enraged spectators began chasing him down, hungry for blood. Addison was thrilled he could now say he'd been chased by a horde of Mongols. The New Yorkers centered ahead of the angry throng. Weaving through the side streets, they found the rest of downtown Ulaanbaatar somewhat empty. Addison opened his mare up to a full gallop. Behind him, Mongolians vented their rage on every shop and food cart they passed, tearing open storefronts and looting the city. Ulaanbaatar was descending into a full-scale riot. Addison was not proud of this, but he thought it might help keep the police occupied. He was mistaken. The full might of the city police department cruised in from all directions, patrol cars skidding to barricade intersections. They may have been riding the fastest horses in Mongolia, but they were no match for the fastest police cars in Mongolia. With each street blocked off, Addison felt himself being hemmed into the maze of the city. "Addison, where are we going?" called Molly. "I don't know, and I'm not stopping for directions." He pulled Roland J. Fiddleton's Asian Atlas from his pocket, craning his neck, and turned the map in all directions as they galloped from north to west to south and back to west again. "The police are boxing us in," called Molly. They galloped into an intersection and found all their exits walled off by police cars. Addison spurred his horse down a side alley. "Choo, choo," he shouted, and the horse kicked into a higher gear. A police car roared down the alleyway behind him. Addison was sure they were going to be mowed down. There was no escape. Looking forward, Addison caught a sight that stopped the breath in his throat. 2 Mongol warriors at full gallop, swords drawn, black hair streaming behind them as they barreled toward him. Before Addison could react, the warriors swept past him, past his team, and swung their swords down at the police car, slashing all 4 tires. The police car's rims struck the raw concrete in a shrieking shower of sparks. It skidded to a stop, wheels grinding against the pavement. A conga line of police cars rear-ended the first car, clogging up the alley like plugging a dike. The Mongols reined their horses and reversed course, catching up with Addison's crew. "Who are these guys?" asked Eddie, astonished. "I don't know," shouted Addison. "And nobody." The black dark had unwrapped the scarves from their faces and smiled at the New Yorkers. Addison recognized their horses and remembered they had stabled by them. Addison recognized their horses and remembered they had stabled them by the Muddy Duck. "How did you find us?" "You're kind of hard to miss," said I Don't Know. Addison couldn't help but admire the way I Don't Know's long hair tumbled across her shoulders. But before he could get too distracted, he heard fresh sirens bearing down from the east. "Can you get us out of the city?" "We want to go north," said I Don't Know, "but there's a race in the way." Addison cut a path due north. A horse race is not an obstacle when one is on a horse. He knew he was heading in the right direction when the crowds grew so thick it was hard for police cars to follow. He steered directly for a course barricade, and this time his mare made the leap. He touched down on the race course, expecting to be loudly booed or pelted with fruit. After plowing around a few curves, Addison noticed the crowd was actually cheering him. Somehow his team had taken a massive shortcut and they were suddenly in the lead. Addison had never entered a national horse race before, but his competitive instincts kicked on like a stadium floodlight. "Come on," he urged his excited horse. "Choo, choo." Molly's gelding pulled within a horse's tail of Addison's before they galloped over the finish line, snapping the yellow racing tape. Addison was showered in confetti, champagne bottles popped, and the crowd cheered. The horses slowed, enjoying their moment, but Addison spurred them to keep right on running. Nobody grinned radiantly. "All my life I've dreamed of competing in the Nadamd horse race. I never thought I would someday cross the finish line." "Stick with me, nobody," said Addison. Police cars closed in on Addison's left hand and his right. They skidded into place, walling off escape routes. A few squad cars crept up on Addison's rear. The team's horses were laboring hard, heaving for breath. Addison was not worried. "Nobody, have you ever seen a spinning duck?" "What's a spinning duck?" "Just a little trick we learned when we were chased by the policia in Ecuador. First you spin." They galloped their horses around the blind corner of an intersection, following Addison's lead. They reined into a crowded horse paddock. "Then you duck." They jumped down off their mounts and lay flat, hiding among the crowd of horses. Addison peered through the wooden fencing and counted 17 police cars that thundered past at full speed, red and blue sirens blaring, before disappearing around the next bend. The team walked their horses through alleyways and backyards, keeping off the main roads until they reached the perimeter of the city. It wasn't until they crossed an empty highway and climbed into the cover of the wooded foothills that they paused to look back. From the shouting and the police sirens, at least half of Ulaanbaatar was embroiled in a riot. Smoke still rose from the heart of the city where they had blown up Madame Fang's palace. Molly shook her head. "We're running low on cities we haven't completely wrecked." Addison shrugged, admiring their work. "Plenty of fish in the sea, Molly."